A black screen in a remote support session is not a minor annoyance. It is the exact moment when the person asking for help can still hear you, but you cannot see the desktop you are meant to fix. And KDE has just addressed a specific version of that problem in Plasma's built-in remote desktop server. The official change notes say some clients could receive a black screen instead of the expected desktop image. They also say the server has been improved for less than ideal network connections. Now, that sounds straightforward. A bug was fixed, the connection should be smoother, job done. But remote desktop is one of those topics where a small technical change can have a very large practical consequence. It affects whether you can help a colleague with a broken application, whether you can reach a machine across a poor connection, and whether a built-in tool is good enough for the workflow you actually have. So today, we are not doing a desktop tour video. We are going to separate three things that are often bundled together. What KDE says it fixed, why that particular bug produced a black screen, and what you should test before you decide that Plasma Remote Desktop is ready for your own support environment. Because there are two questions that matter here. First, does the fix hold up when the connection is not perfect? And second, even if the black screen bug is gone, does that automatically make this the right remote access tool for multi-monitor support, clipboard handoff, or more demanding environments? We will answer both. But first, it helps to understand why a remote desktop can look connected and still deliver nothing useful. KDE's official update from August 8th describes a series of UI improvements. But for those of us managing remote workflows, one specific merge request stands out. The linked KRDP change record explains a bug that caused sessions to establish but display nothing but a black screen. It is a workflow you should test on your own setup. KDE's own change record gives us a useful explanation. In the affected path, the remote desktop stream was being created with the wrong kind of identifier. The desktop portal provided a PipeWire node ID, but the code treated that value as though it were an object serial. That distinction is not exciting on its own, but it is exactly the sort of distinction that matters when asking for a video stream. The change record says PipeWire then looked for a target object that did not exist. No frames arrived in the stream. And from the client's point of view, the result was a black screen. That is the key distinction. This was not necessarily a network outage. It was not the person at the other end forgetting to unlock their screen. And it was not a vague Linux remote desktop is flaky situation. KDE identified a concrete stream creation error in a specific path. They changed the logic so the source is created with the appropriate identifier. For a support professional, this is the kind of bug worth paying attention to. A remote session can look healthy enough to establish. Authentication can succeed. The client can connect. But if the video path does not receive frames, the session is useless. The important caution is that one fixed cause does not describe every report. Different clients, display servers, and session states can produce different symptoms. The fair reading is narrower. KDE has fixed this documented failure mode in the Plasma 6.8 work. And that takes us to the next question. A session that receives frames is one thing. A session that remains usable when the network gets ugly is another. The second part of KDE's update is quieter, but it may matter more to anyone who supports machines outside a perfect home network. KDE says the built-in remote desktop server now has less latency and better performance on less than ideal connections. The linked KRDP work is about flow control, how many frames the server is allowed to have in flight while it waits for the client to acknowledge them. Here's the practical version. A remote desktop is constantly balancing two bad outcomes. Send too cautiously and the screen feels delayed. Send too aggressively and a slow or unstable connection can build a queue faster than the client can handle it. The KRDP change record describes a fixed 2-frame limit as a problem when latency rises. The work moves toward a submission window that responds to round trip time and the rate at which the stream is actually producing frames. That does not mean we should invent a number and tell you the session is now twice as fast. The KDE sources do not give us a universal performance figure. They describe a change intended to avoid throughput collapse as latency, loss, or jitter make the link worse. And that is exactly why a proper support test needs more than a successful local connection. A local network can hide the problem completely. What you need is a reproducible setup where you know the client, the server, the display configuration, and the network conditions. In a moment, I will show you the checklist I would use. But there is one more reason this topic matters. Remote desktop is not a single feature. It is a chain of dependencies, and the black screen was only one link in that chain. KDE's official update says there are significant improvements to the Plasma UI and remote desktop experience. When people say that remote desktop works, they often mean one thing. They connected once from another machine on the same network and saw a desktop. That is a useful starting point. It is not a support verdict. This is a workflow you should test on your own setup. For this update, the first test is obvious. Can the client receive the desktop image where the documented regression used to leave it black? But after that, the test needs to behave like a real support session, as the linked KRDP change record describes. Start with the basics. Can the remote user authenticate? Does the expected desktop appear? Can the support person interact with it? Does the session stay visible after a window opens, a display wakes up, or the user changes workspaces? Then add the things that usually expose the weak points. If the user has more than one display, what does the client show? If a helpdesk agent needs to copy a command, a URL, or a diagnostic message, does the clipboard behave as expected? If the connection pauses for a second, does the picture recover cleanly, or does the session become awkward enough that you reach for another tool? And then there is the uncomfortable question. How do you test a bad connection without making the video look like a fake benchmark? The answer is to document it. If you add latency, packet loss, or jitter, state exactly how you did it. If you do not have a controlled setup, do not pretend that a normal Wi-Fi session proves remote performance. This is where a lot of remote access videos go wrong. They leap from the feature exists to this will replace your current setup. That is not how support tooling works. A tool can be excellent for an attended desktop session and still not be what you want. For unattended machines, strict access control, or a fleet with mixed operating systems. So, with the scope clear, let's look at the exact evidence we should capture and the questions each capture actually answers. Let's start with the black screen regression, because this is the one part of the story where KDE has given us a clear technical description. The source says that on the affected XDG Desktop Portal path, the video source was created with the wrong identity. PipeWire looked for something that was not there. No frames reached the stream, the client saw black. A good test for the current build is therefore not, did I manage to launch Remote Desktop? It is, does a client receive and continue receiving a real desktop image through the path that was affected? If you have access to an older affected build, a before and after capture is ideal. But there is an important rule here. If you do not have that older build, do not manufacture a black screen for the camera and present it as the historical bug. KDE's source record is the evidence for the old failure. Your current capture is the evidence for the build you are actually running. This might sound overly cautious, but it is the difference between a useful technical video and a very polished looking story that people cannot trust. Linux users notice when a supposedly real desktop screen does not behave like a real desktop. Once the image arrives, run a short set of normal actions. Open a settings page, move a window, switch a workspace. Let the local user interact for a moment, then reconnect. Not to make the sequence dramatic, but to make sure you are not proving only the first second of a session. At this point, we have answered the narrow question. Can this current session deliver the desktop image instead of the documented black screen? The next question is tougher, and it is where the network work becomes relevant. Can it stay useful after the connection stops being kind? KDE's official update says the server now has less latency and better performance on weaker connections. The associated KRDP work is built around adaptive flow control, so the stream does not stay stuck behind a fixed, tiny in-flight frame limit as round trip time increases. What that should mean in practice is not a magical frame rate number. It should mean that the session has a better chance of staying responsive. It should mean that the session stays responsive even when the link has delay, loss, or jitter. The test itself should be simple to understand. Repeat the same actions you performed on the healthy link. Open and move a window. Navigate a settings page. Trigger a normal desktop change. Then describe what the support person can actually see and do. Do not rush to make this a laboratory benchmark. A practical answer is more valuable. Was the session still usable for support, or was the delay distracting enough that you would choose another method? And if you have no controlled network test, say that plainly. The source records the improvement. It does not give us permission to invent results. By the way, I checked the current channel analytics while preparing this video. About 83% of the people watching Tondos Linux and More are not subscribed yet. If these practical Linux deep dives save you time or save you from a bad support decision, consider subscribing. It is free and it makes sure the next one reaches you. Because the test is only half of the decision. Even a smoother session may still have limits that matter in your environment. Clipboard behavior, multiple displays, authentication, unattended access, those are separate questions and they deserve separate answers. A remote session is useful only when it lets you complete the kind of support work you actually have. For some people, that means one display and a short attended session. A family member, a colleague, or a home machine where someone is present to approve the connection. For others, it means copying a URL, checking an application setting, moving between displays, or supporting a workstation that has more than one thing happening at once. Those are not minor details. They are where a tool moves from interesting feature to part of the workflow. The first thing to verify is the display model. Does the client present the desktop in the way you expect? Does it handle the layout you are testing? Do not assume that a successful single display connection tells you everything about multi-monitor support. If your team relies on multiple displays, capture that scenario. If you cannot test it, state that it remains unverified for your setup. The same goes for clipboard behavior. It is tempting to treat it as an obvious feature, but it can be the difference between a useful troubleshooting session and a phone call where you read commands out loud. Copy a harmless piece of text, paste it where it needs to go. Show the result. Nothing more dramatic is required. There is also an access model question. A built-in remote desktop feature may be excellent for an attended session and still not be the tool you choose for unattended access, enterprise identity integration, audit logging, or a mixed operating system fleet. That is not a failure, it is just scope. And this is the moment where the black screen fix matters most. It removes a documented failure from the video path. But it does not remove the need to choose a tool based on how you work.
There is a temptation every time a desktop project fixes a real pain point to turn it into a much larger claim. Now you do not need anything else. That is not the conclusion here. The useful conclusion is more specific. KDE Plasma has documented and addressed a remote desktop path that could leave some clients staring at a black screen. It has also documented work intended to make the RDP stream behave better when the connection is impaired. Those are meaningful improvements because they target two things that make support sessions feel broken: no image and an image that cannot keep up. But deployment is where you decide whether that is enough. If you are helping a user on a Plasma desktop and the session is attended, a built-in RDP path may be exactly what you want. Less software to install, a workflow closer to the desktop itself, and a clear feature set that you can test in the environment you actually support. If you need unattended access, central policy management, broad cross-platform coverage, formal audit trails, or a solution for machines that are not all running the same desktop, your requirements are different. Evaluate those requirements directly, instead of assuming that any desktop's built-in tool is meant to solve them all. There is a security benefit to thinking this way. You avoid treating remote access as a switch you flip because it is convenient. You decide what exposure you are creating, who is allowed in, how sessions are initiated, and how you will support the tool when something fails. For a home user, that can be a short checklist. For a small team, it may mean documenting a standard test. For an administrator, it may mean choosing a different platform entirely. The current KDE work does not make those decisions for you, but it does make the built-in option more worth evaluating. So let us turn this into a straightforward checklist you can use before you deploy it, recommend it, or replace an existing workflow with it. Before you decide that KDE Remote Desktop is ready for your workflow, run this checklist. Not because checklists are exciting, but because they stop a clean demo from becoming a messy support call later. First, write down the exact Plasma build on the host and the exact client you are using. The black screen fix is tied to a specific remote desktop path, so versions and client behavior matter. Second, verify the basic attended session. Connect. Confirm that the desktop image appears. Open a window. Move it. Reconnect. If that sequence fails, do not skip ahead to more advanced testing. Third, test the things your own support work requires. If you need a clipboard, test the clipboard. If you need multiple displays, test the display layout you actually use. If you need to support someone across a poor connection, document the test conditions and repeat the same actions under those conditions. Fourth, decide what the test does not cover. A successful attended session does not prove unattended access. A good local network session does not prove performance over the internet. A single host and client combination does not prove every distribution, portal configuration, or hardware setup. And fifth, make a decision based on the answer you got, not the answer you hope to get. If the built-in tool passes the checks that matter to you, great. It may simplify your support workflow. If it does not, that is useful too. You have found the boundary before a user finds it in the middle of a problem. That last point is the whole reason this KDE update is worth covering. The story is not merely that a bug was fixed. The story is that one common failure mode has a documented cause, a documented fix, and a practical way to verify whether it changes your day-to-day experience. With that checklist in hand, we can now state the verdict clearly. So, is KDE Remote Desktop fixed? The honest answer is that KDE has fixed a real documented black screen failure in Plasma's built-in remote desktop server, and it has documented work aimed at improving behavior on weaker connections. That is significant. It means the feature is more credible for people affected by that specific failure. What it does not mean is that every remote support problem has disappeared. Your client, your display layout, your network, your access model, and your security requirements still decide whether it is the right tool for you. That is not a disappointing conclusion, it is the useful one. If you run Plasma and you use Remote Desktop for attended support, this update is worth putting on your test list. Start with the basic connection. Confirm the desktop image. Then test the actions you need on the kind of connection you actually have. If it holds up, you may have a cleaner built-in option for that specific workflow. If you run into an edge case, such as multiple displays, a particular RDP client, or an unusual network path, document it. That feedback is how desktop features stop being good demos and become reliable tools. If a controlled packet loss and latency test would be useful, tell me in the comments. It is the clearest next question for people supporting machines beyond their own local network. If you found this breakdown useful, like the video and subscribe to Ton Does Linux and more for practical Linux news and support-focused deep dives. And if you want to support the channel directly and get some cool perks, consider clicking the join button below to become a pseudo user or get root access.